"Is sick, Corporal. They're waiting." The words came from a man nobody had invited, a man nobody had even noticed until he was already standing at the edge of the yard. It was Corporal Reed Jasper who first saw him. Jasper was 23 years old, newly posted to CFB Petawawa's military working dog section, and he was having the worst week of his career. Out on dusty fields, he was standing outside the kennel block with a half-eaten granola bar in his hand, and the particular hollow expression of a person who has stopped trying to understand what they're looking at. Inside the runs, 4 dogs were destroying the morning. Not barking, not whining, destroying it. The sound was a physical thing, a wall of it, as raw and ragged and wrong in a way that made Jasper's back teeth ache. He turned to find the source of the voice. The old man stood at the chain-link gate to the exercise compound. He wore canvas work trousers, the color of old pine needles, and a quilted flannel vest over a cream Henley of outfit you'd expect on a man checking his vegetable garden before breakfast. His hair was white and close-cropped, his face the geography of a life spent outdoors, all deep lines and weathered angles. He carried a canvas bag over one shoulder, the kind hardware stores give out for free. I was looking at the kennels, not at Jasper, with the focused, unhurried attention of a man reading a complicated document for the second time. "Sir, this is a restricted area," Jasper said. "You'll need to show me some identification and tell me what your business is here." The old man finally looked at him. His eyes were a pale, washed-out gray of the sky over Georgian Bay in November. They were tired eyes, not exhausted, tired in the way that has become permanent. "In Marsh," he said. "I'm here to look at the HVAC unit in the admin block. Work orders at the front gate." He shifted the canvas bag on his shoulder. "These your dogs?" Jasper hesitated. The compound's aging heating system had been throwing error codes for 2 weeks. Someone had called a contractor, though Jasper had missed the memo. "They're the section's dogs," he said carefully. "Are at MWD's. They've been in a heightened state since." He stopped himself. "Jean." For a while. Gordon Marsh looked back at the kennels. Inside the runs, the 4 dogs had not stopped. There was Brute, a massive Czech-line German shepherd, 9 years old, who had done 4 tours with the Royal Canadian Regiment before his handler, Warrant Officer Delacroix, had been medically released with a shattered knee. It was Circe, a Belgian Malinois female with a service record that read like a citation, 6 confirmed drug seizures at the border, 1 live fugitive apprehension, and 3 deployments overseas. Her handler reassigned to Shiloh without warning 6 months ago. There was a dog named Kilo, a Dutch shepherd of extraordinary intelligence, who had spent 5 years as a search and rescue specialist in both combat and disaster zones, and who had not eaten a full meal in 11 days. And there was Pepper, a dark sable shepherd cross, the oldest of them at 11, who had simply stopped sleeping. She stood in the back corner of her run at all hours, watching the entrance, waiting for someone who was not coming back. Captain Lise Vautrine, the section officer commanding, had inherited this situation 2 months ago when her predecessor transferred to Gagetown. She had a background in logistics and a genuine love for the military working dog program. It had also been handed 4 behavioral files thick enough to stop a door and a kennel staff who were quietly terrified. 2 airmen had already requested transfers. NRD behaviorist from the Canadian Forces Veterinary Services had visited, assessed, and recommended a graduated exposure protocol with measured social reintegration. The protocol had been running for 6 weeks. The dogs were getting worse. Vautrine was in her office when Jasper knocked. She was reading the behaviorist's follow-up report for the 3rd time, looking for something she had missed, and finding nothing. "There's a contractor here for the HVAC," Jasper said. He's standing at the kennel fence." "Then move him along." "Yes, ma'am." The thing is, the dogs have stopped. She looked up from her report. Stop what? Everything, ma'am. She was at the window in 4 steps. Others were silent. Not the temporary, held breath silence that sometimes followed an outburst before the next one started. A real silence. Brute was sitting pressed against his kennel door, reached forward, his massive head tilted slightly to one side. Circe was at rigid attention, every line of her body taut and focused. Kilo had come to the front of his run for the first time in days. Justin Pepper, who had not left the back corner of her kennel in 2 weeks, was standing at the fence, all looking at the old man. Vautrin was outside in 30 seconds. Gordon Marsh had not moved from the gate. He hadn't reached through the fence or made any attempt to interact with the dogs. He was simply standing there, his weight settled and easy, his gaze moving slowly from run to run. He was reading them the same way he'd read Jasper, that same careful second-read attention. Mr. Marsh, then said, coming up beside him, Captain Vautrin, I understand you're here for the heating system. That's right. He didn't take his eyes off the dogs. Admin block, East Wing. Your facilities sergeant has the work order. He paused. I've been like this. Like what? He gestured, a small motion almost imperceptible. Unmoored. Vautrin felt something tighten in her chest. It was exactly the right word. She hadn't been able to find it herself. Since we started taking in retired handlers' dogs, she said, there's a high rotation of handlers reassigned or released in the last 18 months. 4 of them left dogs behind. The program is supposed to transition them to adoption placements, level, but these 4 haven't been able to pass the behavioral assessments. They're too reactive. Reactive, Marsh repeated, the word careful and neutral, the way someone repeats a word when they find it insufficient. He was quiet for a moment. Circe had not moved, as she was watching him with an intensity that made Jasper take an involuntary half-step back. That one's protecting something, Marsh said, nodding towards Circe. She keeps checking left, happened on her left side. Vautrin stared at him. Circe had an old, soft tissue injury in her left shoulder from a training incident. It had healed, overprotective of that side, ever since. It was in her file. There was no way a civilian HVAC contractor standing at a fence could have known that. How do you know that? She asked. Marsh finally looked at her. Old shoulder injury, she squares up to everything she's worried about, takes it head so nothing can come from that side without warning. He looked back at the dogs. The big one's been leader. Probably the whole kennel section. Now he doesn't know who he's leading, making him spiral. He glanced at Brute, who was still pressed against his door, tail beginning a slow, uncertain movement. And that old girl in the corner, Pepper. She's not waiting for a person, waiting for a command. She was given a job and no one's told her the job is finished. She's still on duty. The words landed somewhere under Vautrin's sternum. She had read Pepper's file 6 times. She had watched the dog pace and stand and refuse to rest. But she had not understood it. Take that. Mr. Marsh, she said slowly. What kind of HVAC work did you say you do? The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The kind that keeps old buildings running. It was Sergeant First Class Bernard Okafor who ran the practical side of the kennel section. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, and deeply skeptical of anything he hadn't seen proven with his own eyes. He spent 11 years working with military dogs in various postings across Canada and 1 rotation in Latvia. And he had never heard anyone describe a traumatized retired MWD as unmoored. He also never seen 4 of them go quiet for a civilian standing at a fence. He said nothing when Vautrin asked Marsh to stay for a few minutes. He stood with his arms crossed and watched as Marsh set his canvas bag on the ground near the gate. He crouched, which clearly cost him something in his knees, and spent a long moment at eye level with the fence, He wasn't doing anything. He was simply there, unhurried, at the same altitude as the dogs. Patient in the particular way of someone who understands that patience is not passive. Brute moved first as he stepped forward, all 400 pounds of German Shepherd presence, flowing into a single, deliberate motion, and pressed his nose to the chain link, where Marsh's shoulder was closest to the fence. He did not bark. He breathed. Marsh said something. It was too low for Okafor to hear clearly, but the cadence was unmistakable. It wasn't a command. It wasn't praise. It was acknowledgement. Epi Fields. Okafor had spent 11 years learning what it looked like when a handler truly saw his dog. Not a problem to be managed, not an asset to be maintained, but a specific individual with a specific interior life. He was watching it happen now, between a strange old man in a quilted vest and a 90-pound German Shepherd named Brute, through a chain-link fence in 3 minutes flat. He's done this before, Okafor said quietly. Vautrin looked at him. That's not technique, Okafor said. Does he learn that? Marsh moved along the fence slowly, giving each dog the same quality of attention. With Kilo, he sat on his heels in the gravel for 5 full minutes, saying nothing at all, until the Dutch Shepherd lay down on his side with a long, shuddering exhalation that sounded like something releasing after a very long time under pressure. With Circe, he turned his left side slightly toward the fence, a subtle offering, a way of saying, I'm not going to approach from there, and the Malinois lunged at every uniformed person who had come within 10 feet of her run in 6 weeks, took 2 steps forward, and sat down. When he reached Pepper, he stopped. The old shepherd had come to the fence, and she was watching him with dark, serious eyes, her posture still the posture of a dog on duty, upright, vigilant, alert to everything. Arsh looked at her for a long moment. Then he straightened slowly and came to his full height, and he said, clearly enough for all of them to hear, a single phrase in German. 2 words. Frei. Ruhe. Free. It was a release command. Not the standard one used in the Canadian Forces MWD program. An older phrasing, unusual. His own Okafor knew it because his grandfather had been a police dog handler in Ghana in the 1970s and had trained under a German system. Pepper sat down, not the rigid military sit of a dog still on duty. She simply sat the way a dog sits when it finally believes that nothing bad is going to happen. Her tail moved once. She looked up at the old man, lay down, her head on her paws, her eyes closing for the first time in Okafor's memory. Nobody said anything for a moment. Vautrin found her voice first. Mr. Marsh, I ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly. Marsh looked at her. Command isn't in the CFB Petawawa MWD manual. It's not in the current RCMP K9 training framework either. I know because I looked those up in the last 2 months trying to figure out what language those files were keeping. Where did you learn it? Marsh picked up his canvas bag from the ground. He was quiet for long enough that Okafor thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, long time ago, in work. What kind of work? The kind you don't put in a resume. He said it without any flourish. It landed flat and simple, and somehow more significant than if he'd said it dramatically. Okafor uncrossed his arms. He had served alongside men who carried things like that. Pasts that lived in specific silences. In the way they moved through a room. In commands no one else recognized. Directed not to push. Also learned that those men were usually the most useful people in the building. The HVAC unit can wait, Okafor said, looking at Vautrin. She nodded. Mr. Marsh, would you be willing to come inside? I spent 3 hours with the dogs that afternoon. He didn't do it dramatically. There were no revelations, no single electric moment after the one with Pepper. What he did was methodical and quiet and action. To someone who didn't know what they were looking at, almost boring. Oh. He moved between the runs with the section staff, talking in a low, even voice, telling them specific things. Not general principles. Specific things. Brute needed his runs to feel like a threshold, not a cage. Put something of his handlers in there, a piece of worn clothing, something that smells like a known person, not a new one. Let him guard it. Give him something to be guardian of. Cersei needed someone to always approach her from the right side until her confidence rebuilt. Left, not yet, not until she offered it. Kilo needed a job more than he needed comfort. Set him problems, simple ones. Scent discrimination, object retrieval, not for performance, for purpose. Let him solve things. Dogs like him don't heal through rest. They heal through work. He stopped at Pepper's run last. The old shepherd was still lying down. Her breathing had slowed. A fee. Okafor had checked her water twice, a reflex born of 11 years of reading dogs. And each time Pepper had looked at him with those serious, calm eyes, which was already different from the standing, fixed, on-duty stare she had maintained for weeks. She's not going to transition to a civilian placement, Marsh said. It was not a question. The behaviorist flagged it, Vautrin said. She's too deeply imprinted on structured command environments. A civilian home would confuse her. She needs work, and she's 11, so she can't go back to active duty. She needs to retire, Marsh said. Not be retired. There's a difference. He looked at Pepper. She needs someone who comes every day. Same routine. Not to work her, just to be there. To check in. She was a sentry. Let her keep sentry. Put her somewhere she can watch something that matters. Make her post, and come visit her post. Paused. She needs to believe the post still exists. Okafor wrote it down. He wrote all of it down. Vautrin walked Marsh to the admin block after, where the HVAC unit was waiting for him, and which he repaired competently and without apparent effort in just under an hour. While he worked, she sat on a folding chair in the corner of the mechanical room and asked him questions. She was careful about it. Instinct for careful questioning that comes from years of writing after-action reports, of extracting accurate information from people who had been through something they weren't sure how to describe. He told her he'd grown up on a farm outside of Moosonee, in northern Ontario. He'd left at 17. He deflected everything after that with the ease of long practice, steering conversations, the way certain rivers steer debris, smoothly, without you noticing, until you were already somewhere else. Ever had children? He said, had dogs. Several over the years. Very good ones. That release command, she said. Frey. Ruh. I looked it up while you were with Cersei. Older German Schutzhund. Phrasing. Out of common use around the mid-80s in most North American programs. He was adjusting a pressure valve. He didn't look up. That's right. So you learned it before the mid-80s. I told you, a long time ago. You'd have been young enough to learn things properly. He set down his wrench. The problem with the way dogs are trained now, he said, without particular emphasis. The way someone says something they've said before, that very good at getting results, and forgot to ask whether the dog understood. You can train a dog to do almost anything in 6 weeks if you find the right motivator. Doesn't mean the dog knows why. When the why disappears, when the handler goes, when the mission ends, the dog has the skill and nothing to put it in. It's like handing someone a map and then removing the country. Vautrin thought about the behaviorist's protocol. 6 weeks of graduated desensitization. Carefully measured, rigorously documented, addressed what the dogs were doing. It didn't address why they were still doing it. You should come back, she said. He looked at her. Not for the HVAC. You should come back and work with my section staff. Formally. We can arrange a civilian consulting arrangement. She paused. For your previous work you clearly have expertise that my team doesn't have. I'd rather have it in the building than not." He was quiet for a while, resealing the panel on the heating unit. Then he said, "I'll think about it." He came back on Thursday, and then again the following Monday. He didn't take a formal arrangement, declined the paperwork. Vautrin's administrative sergeant tried to put in front of him 3 times. It came, and he worked, and the section staff gathered around him with the particular hunger of people who had been trying to solve something for months and had just found someone who spoke the language of the problem. He was hard on them in a way that didn't feel hard. He corrected without humiliating. He demonstrated without performing. When Corporal Jasper fumbled the leash clip on Brute's collar, and the big shepherd shifted his weight in that way, that meant he was about to make a decision Jasper wouldn't like. Marsh simply stepped forward, put one hand on the dog's shoulder, and said his name once, softly, and Brute stood still. Then Marsh handed the leash back to Jasper and said, Again, don't rush the clip. He can hear your hands shaking." His hands were shaking. He had thought no one could tell. He also worked on Okafor, which Okafor found simultaneously uncomfortable and necessary. 20 minutes into his first session, with Marsh watching him handle Kilo, Okafor stopped and said, "You're going to tell me something I'm doing wrong." "I'm going to tell you something you're doing too right," Marsh said. "You're being too good at it, so technically correct, that the dog can't find you under the technique. He's looking for a person, not a procedure." Okafor stared at him. "Handling is excellent," Marsh said, with no apparent attempt to soften it. "You've been trained well and you've worked hard. But excellent handling can become a wall. Now that dog knows exactly what you're going to ask next. Which means he's ahead of you, which means he's not following you, he's hurting you. Make a mistake. Something small. Hesitate. Let him see you figure something out." It was the strangest piece of advice Okafor had ever received. He thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day he tried it, deliberately paused mid-sequence with Kilo, and waited, not doing the next thing, just standing there being uncertain. Kilo looked at him. A Dutch shepherd came to him, pressed his forehead against Okafor's leg, and waited with him. They stood like that for nearly a minute. When Okafor told Marsh about it, Marsh nodded once and said, "I chose you. That's different from obeying you. It takes longer. It lasts longer." The change in the kennels was not sudden. It was not dramatic. It happened the way a temperature drops in the evening, gradually and then completely. The reactive incidents slowed, then stopped. The dogs began to eat with regularity. Brute started sleeping through the night. Circe, 6 weeks after Marsh's first visit, allowed Corporal Jasper to approach from her left side, and when he did, she leaned into him slightly. A small movement that made Jasper go very still and not say anything for a long moment, because he understood what it meant. One afternoon in late October, Okafor found Marsh sitting on an upturned milk crate outside Pepper's Run. The old shepherd was lying inside with her head near the fence, and Marsh had his hand resting on the outside of the chain link. Not reaching through, just present. They were both quiet. Okafor stood back and didn't interrupt. He watched the man and the dog share a silence that was not empty. Later, when Marsh was leaving, Okafor walked with him to the gate, as the kind of late afternoon that Ontario does well. The light low and gold through the birches, the air smelling of cold coming. "Ask you something?" Okafor said. "You can ask. The work you did before, the kind that doesn't go in a resume. Did you do it with dogs?" Marsh looked at the tree line for a moment. "Mostly," he said. "Ada?" A pause that had geography in it, the shape of places that weren't here. "Not always," he said. They walked the rest of the way to the gate in quiet. At the gate, Marsh stopped. "The Belgian," he said. Circe. She's going to be ready for an adoption assessment in the spring. I want someone with experience. Not a first-time dog owner. Someone who's had a working dog before. A retired law enforcement officer, maybe. Someone who understands the concept of a job. She'll do well if you find the right fit. I'll flag it in her file, Okafor said. What about Kilo? Kilo's already home, Marsh said. Just doesn't know. He's allowed to stop looking for the old one. He said goodbye and walked to his truck, an old F-150, the color of old iron, and drove away down the access road without looking back. 3 weeks later, a parcel arrived at the Kennel section. It was addressed in careful plain handwriting to Sergeant First Class Okafor, no return address. Postmarked from a town called Hornipane, a name Okafor had to look up on a map because he had never heard of it. It turned out to be a small community of just over 1,000 people. Deep in the northern Ontario boreal, nearly a full day's drive from anywhere. Inside the parcel was a leather-bound journal, old and worn, the cover soft with decades of handling. It smelled like wood smoke and something else. Something clean and dry, like a room that's been kept in order for a very long time. There was no letter inside the front cover. Someone had written a name and a date in the same careful hand as the address label. The date was 1979. The name was not Gordon Marsh. The journal was full of training notes, and modern ones. These were observations from another era, written in a mixture of English and French, with occasional German phrases in the margins. They described dogs and their individual logics, specific fears and anchors, and the particular kinds of courage each one carried. Described handlers, too, what made them, what broke them, what the dogs needed them to be. There were entries from places Okafor couldn't always identify, locations referred to only by coordinates or code designations. Some of the entries had been redacted with black marker, and the redactions were thorough. Tucked into the back cover was a small photograph, black and white, the edges soft with age. A younger version of Gordon Marsh, lean and sharp-faced, in a jacket with no insignia, knelt in a field somewhere beside a German shepherd of extraordinary bearing. They were looking at each other, not performing, not posing. Looking the way two people look at each other when no translation is necessary. On the back of the photograph, in the same careful hand, 5 words. The dog holds you too. Okafor set it down on his desk. He sat with it for a long time, and then he put the photograph in a frame, hung it on the wall above the Kennel section's scheduling board, and began reading the journal from the beginning. By November, all 4 dogs were sleeping through the night. Pepper had taken to sitting near the section entrance in the mornings, watching the gate, and when the staff arrived, she would stand, and her tail would move, and then she would lie back down, satisfied, her post confirmed, her world in order, on something to watch over. And she watched over it with complete conviction. Vautrin wrote a report. She used words like structured enrichment protocol and evidence-informed behavioral intervention and purposeful routine integration. The report was accurate, also incomplete, because there is no form that captures what it looks like when an old man kneels in the gravel outside a chain-link fence and has a conversation with a dog through the wire, and both of them come away from it changed. She sent the report up the chain. It was received and noted and filed. The program was flagged as a successful pilot for retired MWD reintegration. Guides are fair. Gordon Marsh's name did not appear in it anywhere. A satrap. Vautrin had run his name herself, quietly, with the patience of someone used to finding things in bureaucratic record systems, at his own dusty fields. She had found him in a peripheral reference in a 1988 National Defense Internal Review, this name listed as a point of contact for a project, whose purpose was described only as specialized K-9 operations, joint services, classified. The project had no public record. Its closure date was listed as 1991. Everything else was white space. She thought about the journal. She thought about the coordinates in the margin entries. She thought about the name on the inside cover and the photograph and the fact that a man who had done that particular kind of work for that many years had retired to a small town north of the Boreal and fixed people's furnaces and, their dogs. She thought about what he had said the first afternoon, standing at the kennel fence. They're not sick, they're waiting. As from why? She thought he had probably been waiting too in his way, for something useful to do with what he knew. Something that didn't require him to be anything other than what he was. An old man with calloused hands and quiet authority, and a lifetime of very specific knowledge, standing at a fence, talking to dogs that had been waiting for someone who understood what they were waiting for. December. On a Thursday in December, just before the section shut down for the holidays, Okafor drove out at dawn and took Pepper for a walk along the perimeter road. It was cold the way northern Ontario is cold. A clean and serious cold with frost on the grass and the sound of boots on frozen gravel. Pepper walked at his left side with the easy, settled gait of a dog who has found her pace. She didn't pull. She didn't scan. She walked with him, her breath a small cloud. Her ears relaxed, present in the morning in a way she hadn't been for a very long time. Okafor thought about the journal entry he'd read the night before. A note from somewhere unnamed in the winter of 1983, a single line at the bottom of a page. The ones who were asked to carry the most are the ones who need someone to tell them they can set it down. Old shepherd, walking beside him, her gray muzzle steady, her dark eyes easy, watching the world without alarm. "Good girl," he said. Her tail moved once, twice, and she kept walking, unhurried, alongside him in the cold Canadian morning, as if she had always known this was where she would end up.